super happy and excited to have this conversation with you, and kind of a continuation of our last conversation. And but this one we're gonna actually be able to share with some other people.
Well, Smoke, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation since.
Here we are, and so what I like to do is first of all, before I introduce you, I'll just state my intentions, what the smoke trail is all about. And it's a good idea to state your intentions to yourself, if to no one else, in before you embark on anything, so that you have some conscious awareness to what you're doing, whatever it is. And that can be as simple as you know going on a workout, or making dinner, or also can be applied to any activity you have in the physical world, like a meeting, or in this case, our podcast. And in my intention to the smoke trail is simply, I'm on this journey. I've learned a bunch of things along the way. I'm learning things every day. I learned things since I last talked to you, Steve, a couple of weeks ago. So like it seems like every week I'm like, oh wow, oh, now I know this, now I know that. What I felt at some point, I felt like, wow, I would have been really benefited if I had heard some of this stuff earlier and along my journey, and didn't have to go down 10 little side shoots to find out the one that I felt like was actually really valuable, and then go forward. And I've done that over and over and over again. I know you have too. So the intention here is to share in the journey, to share with people who I have great respect for, who are also on some, well, we're all in some form of journey or path, that have some insights that I think I can learn from, and that our audience, we're going to put it out there in the universe, and see how it sits and how it helps people. And I welcome you if you have any thoughts or intentions yourself.
Yeah, I do. So thank you, Smoke. Thing that I've come to realize is that if we do this and we do this well, we improve ourselves and we improve the energy that we radiate, which has a direct and meaningful impact on others. And often we have no idea that occurs. As you know, I write a Substack that is as much a labor of love as anything else. And one piece I pondered aloud in writing, is this worth it? I don't see a million new subscribers. I get, one or two here and there, three or four here and there, but is this worth it? And I got pulled aside in a coffee shop by somebody. It seems like this stuff always happens in coffee shops. But this person said to me, your writing has a material impact on me. So if you think I am worth it, then please don't stop. And so
Love that.
if we can put a mustard seed in the ground and have it impact one person, the domino effect of that is we don't know, but we are doing good. So my intention for today is really to continue to do housekeeping, to take away and purge the stuff that doesn't belong, to hold up to the light, the things that I'm doing, or the things that I believe, or the things that I'm advocating or embrace, and then determine how authentic are those things to supporting, who I am and what I am really supposed to do. And, am I living those things correctly, or am I continuing to fake it? Which it's really easy to bullshit ourselves and find ourselves in a place where we're telling, hey, we're doing the right thing. In reality, maybe we're not. So, part of today is a systems check, if you will.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thank you for taking the time. I read your posts, your writing, and I've gotten things out of it. So there, count me and the guy in the coffee shop. You got at least two, and probably a lot more. But I have found them to be, they've touched home, and I have. We're going to get into that a bit, and what made you get into that. And first, let me take a second and just, I won't do justice to your full background, but I know it personally. So Steve and I, you and I go way back. We've been friends for decades. you are a serial entrepreneur, as am I. We met in our various entrepreneurial activities. First time in any real way was during .com one, when we both had ventures there, and I had raised a whole bunch of capital. I think, I look back, I think I raised $60 million for eSky in total over several rounds. And back in 99, 2000, that was real money.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. And I still recall sitting in your office with you and one other individual, former, and we don't need to go into who that is. You and I both know him, former, I believe, Coke guy. And we were chatting about that and what your vision was. And I recall, raising that money, and I was, how the heck did he do that? That's amazing. And then, as you recall, I went and did it with another alcbev firm. And raising money is a full-time job, and it's really hard. And everybody thinks it's glamorous and sexy, but sometimes those dollars they come with a hidden cost, and nobody tells you that until it's too late. But dive into the positives and negatives of that as we go forward. I will say that I used to think that raising X amount of money, to say that you raise 30, 50, 70, $100 million was a check mark on how successful you are. And all it does is indicate that, you're a good salesman. But what
Yeah.
did you, but so what? What else is there?
Oh, for sure, for sure. But those were crazy times, and I certainly, and I think you were. I don't want to speak for you, but I think we were both caught in the moment. It was a exciting time, and lots of creative energy, and I believed I was creating something that was going to be worth billions of dollars at the time. It's a pure effort to. It wasn't about raising the money. It was about how do I organize the industry I was working in, and how do I bring the internet to this old regulated business. And anyway, I was definitely on a mission. I'm on a different mission today, but I can't say that I regret any of it. I'm super grateful for the experiences I had in my various ventures. I don't remember who said it, whether it was Ram Dass or somebody, but it was somebody of some wisdom. But I keep quoting it, so I need to remember who said it. But you have to become somebody before you become nobody. And you know, and I don't know if you said that or whatever.
No, I do believe it was Ram Dass. But
Yeah,
Smoke, one of the things that I think it's important to push pause on is, you know, when as we go through these journeys of spirituality, many times we have to have faith in the things that we can't see because we know that they're there. And oftentimes it's our job to either build them or will them or construct them, brick by brick into some form of reality, because others can't see that. And I don't see a whole lot of difference between having a vision for creating a business in a place that it isn't supposed to exist, and everybody says that can't happen, or that's not a reality, or fill in the blank, and you seeing it and then literally manifesting it step by step by step because of faith in what's possible. What we're talking about here today as we go forward in this conversation is really no different.
yeah. No, I'm with you, brother. I totally get it. And when I say that quote, that I guess it is Ram Dass, you got to become someone to know about. It's not about what you became. It's about the things experiences that you have in the world that build up your ego, that contribute to your ego. I'll speak firsthand in my case, that were part of who I became, so that I could then strip them down and realize that, like, what's important, what's the essence that's important. And although those experiences and adventures, I think, helped make me who I am today, I realized, like, the essence of who I am today never changed. And so it's just a perspective, and it's not that one is better than the other, but these a young person that enters the monastery, in their teenage years and gets very, very high up in consciousness and, just studies the scripture. And there's nothing I'm not judging and saying anything bad about it. In fact, it's wonderful. And those monks and those communities help keep the world intact with their level of energy. But I also like the path that I and you have taken, so, each differently, but where we lived in the world, we maybe forgot that, weren't really focused on spirituality. We did a bunch of things, and then we got something that checked us or got us to take a step back and say, whoa, wait a minute, what's important here and what is the essence? And I'm enjoying that aspect of the journey for sure.
Yeah, look, it's to some degree, it's like being a lay preacher, right? We don't have the formal training, but we the application comes through, thoughtful intention of it, the application of what we've learned, and then and trying to provide some context around that. And I think that that's very valuable, is as valuable as the more institutionalized format of spirituality or learning or enlightenment, because we provide not only the theory but the practicality of it, because we've seen what the ruts in the road look like, and they're very real.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Well, let's take a second and talk about. I I I was surprised to read in your pre answers to my question that you had 4 near death experiences, which is, let alone one. I knew about the one which was kind of maybe the one that really, really shook you to the core, I guess, was your bike accident. And I wonder if you mind telling us a little bit about that, just to frame it, not and how what it meant to you coming through that, and how it made you recontextualize, maybe how you were thinking or how you were living.
Well, when you say bike accident, I think I understand which one you're talking about, but to be a bit of a smartass, I have to say, well, which one? Because there were the first one was a couple years ago, and I'll get to the one that you're talking about. It was a couple years ago, and I went straight into the grill of a Ford F-150 after bombing down a road bike course, chasing a former pro and having another former pro and then now a current pro following me, and then a bunch of teammates that were quite good. But I was in a place where I was not making really good judgments at the time. And to quote the Top Gun movie, my body was writing checks that I couldn't cash. So I got hit, broke a bunch of bones. And I recall waking up and having, one of the pros who was following me. And again, I was doing stuff it's not important, but I was way out over my skis, and remember him looking down at me like 6 inches from me, and in that moment of sheer relief that, oh my God, he's not dead, because it probably should have been. He looks at me and he goes, yeah, I've seen worse. There were 2 others, and people say, well, you had near-death experience. No, they were like right there, near-death experiences. One was a deep water diving accident, and one bike accident. But the last one, I don't think it was an accident. It was, I believe, meant to occur for a whole bunch of reasons that, I don't yet fully understand. I was so to lead into the accident, a couple of years back, I was coming off of a business experience that didn't end very well. And I found myself in a position, and I think you and I had maybe a couple conversations then, where I was in full on victim mode. The world and all of the bad shit that was happening to me was not my fault, and poor me. And I really let myself go, and got to the point where I didn't see anything other than what was inside of this little physical box that I found myself in. So that was all there was. And it wasn't all that great. And it was a place where I can now relate when I see a lot of people I'm driving or I'm walking around or I'm doing stuff. I see the look in the eyes of frustration and hopelessness, anger, victimhood, and you fill in the blank. And I was all of those things. I have a picture that I share with a lot of people, and I think you've seen it. And people look at it, they're like, "Yeah, that's not a good look," But I had one person, just one, out of all of the people, as you know, when you're doing certain things in business, you have a lot of people that surround you because they want either the halo effect or they want something from you. They're your best friend until the check comes, and all of a sudden they're not there anymore, or they're, dude, I don't have it, so take
Yeah,
care.
I can I'm sure many of our audience can relate, but I have
Yeah.
been the darling child on all the media and shows and everything else, and everybody's fighting to be in a deal I'm in, and then I've also been where I people won't return a phone call, and nothing changed about me, but the situation changed. So obviously they wanted something out of it, or there was some different energy around it. So I totally get that
Well,
firsthand.
the interesting thing is that when that happens, it's to them, what's changed is forever. But what's happened is simply a moment in time. To your point, you're still who you are, and it's a moment in time. But to them, they're out because it what they see now is the forever. And that's how a lot of people choose to live. It's the same day over and over, 60, 70, 80 years in a row. And then they wonder when they get to some point in their life, what the hell happened and why did this happen to me?
And it can feel quite transactional that if I don't have what you are looking for, then you don't have time for me. But if I have something you need that you actually think you might need, then you have lots of time for me, right? Like that feels transactional.
It is, and often it's people waiting for their turn to talk.
Hmm?
And so they're fishing for that transaction. And they often lack two things: empathy and compassion. So empathy is an understanding of who and what the other person is and what they're going through. And compassion isn't just, oh, here's $1, go buy yourself a coffee. Compassion is really taking some form of action and to be constructive. That's really all it is. So I had one particular individual that took empathy, and he's like, he showed up at my door. He's like, Steve, we're not doing this. You're not doing this. You look like shit. You've given up. No, no, sorry. This is not how it's going to go down. He had signed me up for a series of events that I probably shouldn't have been signed up for, but nonetheless, he did it. And he said, this is what you're going to do. And you know damn well you can do it. And so over a period of 9 months, I got back to the business of living. And magically, when I did that and I moved away from that victimhood standpoint, synchronistic events really started to occur. And I started taking away the noise, the things in my life that were causing noise. It's, the burdens, the stones that had built up over time that I was carrying. And, that was both redemptive and freeing. And then things got a lot better. And then one day, I decided I was going to take 4 or 5 days off of work. And I was preparing to go to a gravel race event called Unbound Gravel. It's a 200-mile race across one day in Emporia, Kansas. I leaned into that because it was this hard thing that taught me more about myself, and what I was capable of doing than anything else. And I recall, that friend of mine who signed me up for these events, the first event that I did, that was 9 months later, after dropping just an insane amount of weight and really getting my head straight, standing on the starting line going, I don't belong here. I cannot do this. It was a complete imposter syndrome. And then I went off with everybody else. And over the course of that 156 miles of racing, I told myself maybe 20, quite literally 5,000 times, once every minute or so, you can't do this. Here's all the reason you can't. And so you break it down into just bite-sized chunks. And pretty soon you're accomplishing things that, you didn't think you were capable of. And so that put me in a very different place mentally and emotionally, but not spiritually. And then so right before before I left to go to this race in Emporia, I got hit from behind by a very large truck. I don't know what kind because it was hit and run. They left me there for dead. And quite literally, I did die. I flatlined and stopped. All my vitals stopped for about 2 minutes. And, I had an NDE. And I say that it was an intentional act by the universe because leading into that accident, there were a series of things that I begin to understand now, but at the time made no sense whatsoever, and I thought were kind of, I don't want to say crazy, but it was just almost difficult to wrap your mind around. But it happened, and I ended up in a level 1 trauma center, and one of the orthopedics who was tending to me said, "Hey man, you're in your mid 50s. Had you not been in the shape both emotionally and physically that you were in, you would either not be dead or you would never ever recover." And he said, "So I don't know what it is that you're meant to do, but by God, you're meant to do. You're still here for a reason." And I recovered, faster than I probably should have, or others did. And to the point,
And you had severe injuries.
oh yeah, I mean, I broke my neck, I broke my back in 4 places. I had 11 other broken bones. I had a compound fracture of the collarbone. I had a fractured skull. I had a TBI. I had a punctured lung. Like I said, I stopped breathing, and my heart stopped beating for 2 minutes.
So you were just hit from behind, and by this truck going high speed, right? When did you when did you figure out that this had happened? Like, when did you know it?
Which part?
I mean, like, well, when did you know that something went wrong? Like, something happened that, like, I'm not riding my bike anymore, and I'm not in Kansas anymore or whatever.
So there were three parts to it. The first was, so I was in a cool down portion of the ride. I was out on a country road in the middle of nowhere, and the truck that hit me likely hit me with, so think like a Ford F-350, just a big pickup truck, and hit me
Yeah.
with a mirror likely. And they made that assumption because of where the broken bones were, and the giant contusion that went all the way up my back that culminated in where the neck and backbones broke. But when that happened, I remember like two things before everything kind of went dark. And the first was a sound of, lots of something big displacing a lot of air, and it came on just like in an instant. And then the second thing was moving towards these giant barrels that were on the side of the road, these 55-gallon drums full of refuse were stacked next to a construction site or a barn or something like that. The name of the person that owned the barrels had painted their name on it. So I just recall before I hit the barrels thinking, now why the hell would somebody paint their name on these 55-gallon drums? And that was the last thing until I woke up, which was like an hour and change later. And I woke up sort of coming out of this near-death experience, and then I remember lying face down, not really being able to breathe, and kind of hearing this wet gurgling sound, which was blood filling up in the lungs or already in there, and thinking, damn, if I don't get up, I'm going to drown. And I didn't even think about things being broken. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what had happened. And I remember trying to stand up, and then feeling this, and you don't think, right? This is just the subconscious going bing bing bing, stuff is wrong. And so standing up, it was like a bag of dominoes, and all the dominoes were kind of moving over each other, and those were all of these broken bones inside moving around. I had no idea my neck and back were broken, so I'm standing there because before I've been lying in a ditch, and I thought nobody will ever see me, and I was going to drown, so I need to get up. So I stood up and just kind of trying to keep my balance, and 10 minutes later, another cyclist comes by and took a look at me, and it's like, no, this isn't good. I ended up getting taken down to a level 1 trauma center ICU, which is where I camped out for a bit.
And I want to get into what this led to, but I know the recovery was miraculous. Nobody in the ER would have bet that you'd be sitting here like you are. They certainly wouldn't have expected you to be up and about as quickly as you were, and what do you attribute that to, and what was your mentality coming out of this? Tell us, give us a little inside scoop of like your perspective.
So leading into the accident a couple of months prior, nothing out of the ordinary was happening. I was journaling, I was doing my gratitude, I was, I was working my program and my process, and all was generally improving. And I was, I was a more balanced person than I'd been in a while. And I saw a lot of work to do, but nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. And then one night I had the first of a series of very unique dreams like I've never had before. The first was I'm sitting on a ledge, and a rocky ledge overlooking this green valley in twilight. And I kind of recognized the valley, or at least it looked familiar. And I just sat there, and it was very peaceful. And then, but that was it. The next night, the same thing. The following night, the same thing, with one exception, and that was that a guy came out of the pine forest that was behind me, and it was an individual that, for all intent and purposes, I've described it to others, including a shaman from New Mexico that I got introduced to, looked like a Dakota medicine man or an indigenous person that had very specific characteristics. And so he began to sit with me. And so this went on for a period of nights. And then one night, the location changed. So rather than being on that ledge, I was inside of those pine trees. And in front of me, there was a clearing, and there was a bonfire in the clearing. So I go through the pines and sit in this clearing. And he comes from the other side of the woods and sits there. And we, for the first time, have a discussion. And I noticed that around the wooden beaded necklace he had a crow's feather and several blue jay feathers. And I made note of that because I thought it was interesting. It was really sort of the blue jay feathers were really sort of the one pop of color outside of the fire. But this was a very realistic dream. I could smell the smoke. I could hear the pop of the flames. I could smell the pine. And I distinctly recall the conversation. It was almost like a lucid dream. I'm like, this is a dream, but it's not. And so the next morning, I'd left my journal sitting outside underneath our pergola, which is in a protected area that's kind of surrounded by pines. And sitting next to the pergola were 3 blue jay feathers that were just sort of, I don't want to say scattered, but placed on the table next to my journal. And then it dawned on me that over the course of these past few weeks, that the normal birds that we have that inhabit our area, and this is May, robins and blue jays and finches, they'd all disappeared and had been replaced by dozen or so blue jays. And blue jays are very territorial, so you don't see a dozen or so of them. You see 2 or 3 or 1 or 2, but not 15 or 20, which had been the case. And I'd never noticed it, but I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So I find these blue jay feathers that are sitting there, and I think there's got to be some consequence to these things being there. And then I recall the dream thing. And that guy had on a blue jay feather. He had crow feathers on. So I look it up, and there's a significance to that from a spiritual standpoint. And then the next night, go back to the same place, and there he is sitting across from me in the fire. And I noticed that the crow feather is there, but the blue jay feathers are gone. And I had actually, the physical ones I kept and taped in my journal, and I wrote about it. He says to me, you have a difficult path that you need to choose, and they lead very different directions. You need to choose right now. And I said, well, where are they? And he points to his left, which was my right, which I got the sense which was out by the ledge where I'd been the first time. He pointed behind him, and then he pointed to his right, which was my left. And that was much in the deeper pine forest. And he said, you can choose one of those directions, but you must choose now. And I said, well, I like the direction to the right, because that's where I felt the openness was. And he goes, I believe you've chosen wisely. He said, but time will tell. And he got up and turned around and walked out the path into the darkness that was behind him, which was one of the choices. So the next day I get hit, and I recall.
Okay, this happened all before the accident.
And that was the night before the accident. All of this led up to the night before the accident. He said, you have a choice. And so when I got hit, after noticing the barrels rushing at me at some high rate of speed, I remember waking up and to a smell of grass and clover. And So I sit up and I look around, and I'm back in that field, but it's daylight. There's no bonfire, but it's that meadow that's in the midst of the trees. And so I get up and I walk to the right, and I come through the right, and rather than it being a rocky ledge, it's a broad, shallow mountain stream that's full of river rocks, and it's bordered on either side by pine forests, and behind that are just these beautiful mountains that kind of reminded me of the Canadian Rockies. And so I step over the stream across the rocks, and I walk through this field, and it seems like I walk forever, but in a matter of minutes, I end up in front of this guy, and it's the same guy that's been in my dreams. And so he says to me, "This is not your place, it's not your time, but it's important that you visit here and you understand the reality of what it is that you're seeing, so that when you return, and return you must, that you've made the right decision, and it leads you down this path." And so I said, "Well, I kind of want to stay here." And he says, "You can't." So he turn around, and he sends me back, walk across the path. And as I'm walking back, he says to me, he goes, you have to let go of the remaining stones that you carry." So I get to the stream, and I look, and in my hands, I've got three giant stones. And these are behaviors or beliefs or burdens that I've been carrying for some time. So I drop them into the river and realize, oh shit, those are mine. I need them back, but they're gone, right? So I cross over the stream, back to the meadow, and I sit down and get sleepy, fall asleep. And then the next thing you know, I remember waking up face down in clover and grass, thinking, before my eyes opened, I could smell the clover and grass. And I said, "This is a great smell. I wish I could stay here forever." Then I opened my eyes, and I'm back here. What do I make of that? I was given another chance to live a life that maybe is a little different than before. So I know a couple things for certain. I know that it happened. I know that death, as we believe it, is not what we've been sold. I know I'm not scared of it, and I know that there's a lot more to this world than our five senses tell us. And because I know those things with certainty, I'm choosing now to live my life in a different way. In large part, it's paying off.
I love the story, and it's incredible, and I know it happened too. Like, I wasn't there, but I know it from the way you described it. It just I know it. You got a download too. So you shared with me a chart that looked like it came out of some spiritual textbook, or some Ken Wilber, or somebody who's out there writing stuff, and it came from this being, right?
Yeah, this being, who, his name is either Black Horse or Dark Horse. I'm not quite sure which, but I can if you put a composite artist in front of me, I could have it drawn, right? I know exactly what he looks like, but he'd been back a couple of times, three times. And the first time he came back, he with a stick in the dirt that was, in this meadow. There was a grassy area, and there was some dirt where the fire once was, but it wasn't. It was dirt and ash. He drew that chart, and he said, and walked me through it. And then he asked me where I thought I was. And
And,
I,
and I'll put it up here for the audience, if that's all right. Where did you think you were on this chart, which starts out
um,
at fear
I
and
bought,
rage
I
and
bought
anger
the,
and goes all the way up to joy and purpose and realization?
yeah. So in the middle, it looks like an hourglass, right?
Yep.
So there's an eye of a needle, and there's a lot of spiritual and religious uh, documents that talk about, including areas of the Bible that talk about passing through the eye of the needle. But this isn't that as much as it's a choke point for you to leave behind the negative energies that we're not supposed to hold on to, so that you can continue to rise. So the question is, where do I think I am, or where do I think I was? Well, I started my journey down at the lower left, in that sort of victim area, in between addiction and victim, that dark area to the lower left. So as your viewers see, that at the bottom, there's victimhood, there's self-centeredness, selfishness, and in the middle is addiction, and far right is narcissism. That's sort of the bottom, but there's yet another layer underneath that. In between the choke point smoke, the thing that I was told was that each of those layers, sort of like water, as we understand thermoclines from free divers, the deeper you go, the more it pulls you down, and the higher you go, the more it pushes you up. I went from the lower left to, when I was hit, to being sort of in the middle and bobbing up and down between, in that eye of the needle, if you will, the narrow point of the hourglass. And
What amazed me when you sent me that, I was like, wow, like I really thought it came from which spiritual teacher gave you this, which book is this in, right? Because I've read a whole bunch of these things, and when I look at David Hawkins' map of consciousness, and his scale of consciousness maps pretty nicely to this. And there's lots of other modes of, in psychology, like these emotions are a scale, whether you follow David's or you follow some other, basically anger, shame, those lower level emotions, lower energies, they feel thick, they feel heavy, like you say, like lower levels of the water. And as you move up into these higher levels of neutrality, and then beyond that to understanding, to eventually to joy and just kind of a bliss state, feel light, feels vibrating rapidly. It's the high vibration levels. It maps perfectly.
you used a phrase that I really liked when we were chatting last, and that's like, you used the word tar, right? And we talked
Yeah,
about it being
yeah.
sticky and tar-like, and clearly it resonated with you, and you got it, because that's where you came out. I'm like, wow, that's probably the best word I've ever heard to describe it, because that's what it is. It's a simple self-diagnosis, and anybody can print this out, but it's got to really be on paper. And then you just put your heart to it, you point your finger, and you'll probably get a sense of where you are. And once you know where you are, then you can start figuring out, well, how do I get further up? And with that interest and desire to improve, comes the opportunities to do so. And all of that's just hidden in plain sight. It's just, we have to wake up to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it resonated with me, and and really that's the purpose of this show. So like when you shared that, me like, okay, well, I'm feeling joy and bliss, and I've cleared a whole bunch of stuff in my journey along the way, which is dropping stones or clearing away the tar, if you will. And what I came to realize, and just for the audience so they understand, like I actually read this account from one of the guys that was part of putting an enneagram together. I'll say it wrong, but used in
Yeah.
management and understanding people, and he wrote this account, which I it really struck me. It made perfect sense to me, and since then it's just like, well, that's truth, where he had this heightened state of being, and it continued over this retreat weekend. And then he realized, when he was working with the other people on the retreat, and he could see the underlying essence of people. He had kind of seen the light within himself, within nature, plants, and that he could see that within everyone. And so everyone on this retreat, he could see this inner glow. But a lot of them, or many people, were covered up with this black tar at different levels of cover up. So some were really covered up, and they were the people that had a lot of work to do, that had a lot of issues, hadn't dropped stones, hadn't cleared a lot of things. And then there were people that where the tar was very thin. It was almost like it was almost wiped off, but it was, there was still a little bit, but only in patches. And those were people that had done a tremendous amount of work and had kind of cleared themselves. And I love that visual, because it rings true to me, what we all go through as humans, as we drop our ego mind, as we understand the traumas and the things that we've experienced, and we come to terms with it, and you could say transcend it, but I think it's an alchemical process of turning that stuff into, really, it's a superpower once you understand it, and that clears that tar away. And I'm glad it did with you too.
Since the accident, I ask people, mostly strangers, so what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And I'll do that all the time. And I think I'm up to now 147, 148 different people. And sometimes I get some bona fide answers. One guy, I had an argument with my spouse, and one morning, and I watched her drive off taking my daughter to school, and it was the last time I saw them, because they were hit by a vehicle, by a truck, 10 minutes later. Okay,
Yeah.
that's bona fide, right? But most people, most people really haven't had anything really challenging happen to them. And what ends up happening, Smoke, is they start descending into these layers, not because of the adversity that they're dealing with, but because of what they're making up in their minds about that.
Yeah.
And so, I'll ask somebody, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And there's sort of a universal truism. The handful, maybe a dozen people that had something tremendously difficult or challenging or terrible happen to them. There's a common, and they're all different. There's a common thread.
Well, it's funny though, Steve. I mean, the it's easy to say it wasn't someone hasn't had something bad. Like I've had, I had childhood trauma. I had a pedophile grandfather or grandmother that covered it up. And so I've had a bunch of these things that were like really traumatic. As you know, in when I relayed my story, I didn't remember any of that until I did, and then
Right.
I came to terms with it. And those are clearly, you understand why you might have PTSD from these things. But that being said, the smallest thing, you can still build it up in your mind, and it's just as big from a trauma standpoint. I've learned so much. For like, there's a doctor he does a lot of EMDR, right? This treatment, and he claims that 50% of all people in America have childhood trauma. And so that's between zero or infant trauma. So that's between 0 and 2 years old. And
Yeah.
he does this treatment where, and I did it because I was like interviewing him to learn about it, and then he made me do it. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. So I got a chair. He got me into something of a hypnotic state, a theta mind state.
Yeah.
Then he had and he talked me through. Now you go back, you're 1 years old, you can stand up holding on to furniture, you've got a diaper, you're in that place, and you seeing everything happening around you. And I'm like, I don't remember that, right? So but I'm like, okay, I'm putting my head there, I'm in this theta state. And then he does this chair that like vibrates asynchronously very
Mhm.
rapidly, and then he talks me through some more. And it basically it releases an energy that came up at that time. So even if you can't put a name to something, even if it's not like, oh, I had this trauma happen to me, you might have trauma that's inside that you haven't released. The energy's still there. And I call these emotional energy hairballs. They get stuck inside,
Yeah.
and you can. And so in some cases, like in my case, it was really important for me to dissect and understand, find the memories, understand them, contextualize them, forgive everyone, like go through this whole process of knowing. Like I needed to know, I need to remember everything. So I went through a deep digging process to find out. But I also learned that you don't actually always have to need to know. In my case, I did, but then there's other things. If you just find that energy that's embedded, that emotional energy hairball, and you can bring it up, you can release it. And that could be literally you got stuck in your crib and no one came to get you, that somehow you internalize that as this trauma.
Right. Well, and the things that you shared with me were this litany or series of dominoes of things that had happened to you over the years. And yes, you pack that stuff down and you don't even know it's there, right? But it's still impacting you. And
For sure.
because we choose not to pay attention to that. It's like the symptom of a heart attack. You're like, oh, I'm fine, right? So it's time when you're not fine. But the people that I've talked to that have worked through or at least faced those issues, those challenging or terrible or scary issues, like yourself, Smoke, they tend to have these things in common. The first is they're no longer afraid of much. And
Yep.
secondly, they understand that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be introspective and it's okay to dig that stuff out and to let it go because it doesn't belong to you and it's pretty liberating. The others that haven't done that or they really haven't addressed anything or they haven't had things that they remember that are hard, they struggle in those lower levels of energy because the world more often than not happens to them and they don't realize how much agency they really have. Part of the value of the smoke trail and the work that you're doing now and others is to give people permission to understand it and know it's okay to, you know, let the door crack a bit and begin to excavate what's there, and if need be, find help for, you know, or somebody like yourself or who others that'll say simply, you know, it's okay, rather than it's woo woo bullshit and don't talk to me about that.
What I came to realize, and I think we shared this together, but is that the idea of the trauma, the idea of some horrible thing, is much worse than the actual processing of it and going through it. So there's an energy that's this emotion, it's this trauma, and avoiding it is like, oh, we keep it there, and it grows in its importance and its significance, because you don't touch it, and you want to always be like tiptoeing around it. And what I found is, once I did that with myself, you know, this isn't like fun. Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like I'm not talking about like a joy walk on a trail behind me, you know. Um, but it's also not that. It's at the end of the day, the what you get on the other side is complete peace, complete, complete, absolute peace. And as a result, there's nothing I can't sit with, Steve. Like, I mean, I used to cringe when someone tried to tell me some personal thing. I don't want to hear about your problem. Like, I mean, I would listen, but I'd be like, as soon as I could figure out an exit, or I could figure out like, how do we go to the bar and get a cocktail? Let's talk about this over a drink, would be my number one go-to. And basically, like, so, now I'm like, I didn't seek it out, but I have all kinds of people coming to me, and in the way I understand it, I'd love to have what you think this is, but and if you're experiencing this too, but like, because I'm okay, like I can sit with anybody's trauma, like nothing bothers me, like I don't cringe about anything, because it's not, it doesn't, I can sit for it. So what happens is, now I have people coming to me all the time. Hey, I have this problem, or my marriage is going away, or like I have this illness, or my kid is, off the rails, or I don't know, like all kinds of things.
Doctor's in, man. The doctor's in.
Yeah, right. And I'm just like, okay, well, tell me about it. Tell me. Let
Well,
me ask a few. Let me ask a few questions.
look, I thought a lot about this, and the only answer that I can come up with, or the hypothesis, if you will, is that there's a difference. And the people I know, or that I've talked to, some of the people I know that are stuck in those lower forms of energy, the victimhood or the narcissism, they're stuck in the last chapter. And the problem is that it's that thing that you've gone through, that what you just talked about, is not the last chapter. It's the price of admission for the first chapter, because it's about what happens now on the other
Yeah,
side. And so when you realize that you've made it through, and all of that stuff was just the prelude to the first chapter, that's liberating, rather than just living over and over in this narcissistic or this victimhood state, to where you're not willing to address everything, and it's the same day over and over and over.
yeah,
You know, that's the death sentence, right?
yeah. And also, you said you can ask, you can go get help. You have to ask for help. In my case, I was in Nepal at the Buddha's birthplace. Something came over me. I knelt down and I prayed. It wasn't very spiritual or religious, but I prayed, and I asked for peace and love to the Buddha. And I felt this electricity go through my body, up my spine, into my head, and out. And I was like, what was that? And
Mm-hmm.
no idea like what that was, but I asked for help. And that led me to, plant medicine and my whole journey with Yvonne, and then, this uncracking all this stuff. And I realized that when what I wanted was peace and love, which was not like love, like God's love, not like I have great marriage and kids and all that stuff. That was all pretty good. Like, it was great. But I had this anxiety and this like unease at the back of my head that I didn't know existed. I realized that in order to get what I asked for, all of the things in the way of that had to come up. So that's the tar or the rocks or whatever you want to metaphor you want to use. But the things that were in between me and perfect peace were all of these memories that were locked away and these energetic hairballs that were stuck inside in my subconscious that I needed to clear. I needed to learn about, and then in so doing, forgive and then clear. And in by clearing them, what was left was the top of your chart, the top of your picture, that little those things. That's what's underneath the tar. That's what we
Mhm.
all have inside. It's innate in all humans.
No, it's that's true. We just need to remember that that's there. So remember, and it's not adding things; it's taking things away. So it's the removal, the stripping away of all of the tar and the negative energy, all the stuff that we've held on to. That the energy, whether it's negative or positive, or emotions, negative or positive, it's supposed to be the breeze through the pines, but it's not meant to be trapped. We shouldn't cling on to positive memories in hopes of repeating them. We shouldn't sequester away the negative things that have happened because they don't, we don't own them, that we're meant to experience them, but it's transitory, right? The problem is that when we do, when we hold on to all of that stuff, it weighs us down. And it's like treading water, with a backpack full of rocks. At some point, you run out of energy and you just start to sink.
Absolutely. So this has been great. And now fast forward a bit. You and I had a great conversation around this, so I want to bring up the topic. Part of my journey, not everyone's going to have to take their own path. Like the smoke trail, the reason it's called the smoke trail and not the way to God, the pathway to God. No, Steve has his pathway. Smoke has his pathway. The Buddha had his pathway. Now, are there things we can learn from how the Buddha did it, or how David Hawkins did it, or how various teachings? Absolutely. There's all these rich traditions, but for mine, I realized like I had major gaps. I didn't grow up in a any kind of religious family of note. In fact, some of my abuse was around whatever religion I did see. My grandfather was an organist in a churches. That was his cover. I had no interest in any of that. So like when I started going down this path, I was like, oh wow, I need to understand what am I even dealing with here? What is this? And started going deep and discovered all kinds of things, read ancient scriptures, you name it, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Buddha, and then discovered David Hawkins, who I would say gave me the most clarity into this whole process because he's a relatively modern era enlightened being who was also trained psychiatrist, for 50 years, had the largest practice in the country, was gifted with training and enlightenment and was able to write about it, which for me was really helpful because it really made me understand things. So all these things kind of come together and get given me this understanding. And I believe that our challenge today, not everybody, but the challenge that I believe that my path is on, and I think there's a lot of us, is not to become enlightened and go up in some cave in some remote area and leave the world, but to gain a level of enlightenment, whatever that is, and to be in the world and to exist in the modern world. I think that's the interesting challenge that we have in this modern era with distractions and social media and all the things that get in the way of that. It's the greatest challenge is to also have a peace of mind, have clarity of spirit, and also still not be withdrawn from that world. You have to withdraw from some of it in order to be to be sane, but to live in the world. And we have at our fingertips, and this is both a blessing and a curse, at our fingertips, we have access to all the great traditions, right? We have all these great texts and knowledge, and some of it's been lost, but there's tremendous amount of. You can go down the Zen path, you can go down all these various pathways that get you to a higher level of connection with cosmic heart or divinity or God or whatever you choose to call what it is that we're talking about.
Well, I agree with that. I think that we're at a place, we're in some form of a tipping point where, these conversations, these points of view are a bit like amplifiers. So a frequency amplifier, an electrical amplifier that steps it up, and so that energy, that the positive energy that we're talking about, the ideas, that originate from source, all of the stuff that is already out there. It's just a matter of, have we tuned into those frequencies? Can we decipher it? Can we find it, decipher it, and do something with it? Is on the rise, and it's something that I think is a very positive. It provides me with a great deal of satisfaction and hope that we're in the process of facilitating, real and fundamental change that all of humankind, as well as all of nature, can benefit from. Again, we are so trained to see things in moments in time. This snapshot right now is all that there is, and that's amplified by our desire and habits of immediate gratification. So we don't see the results of it instantaneously. Therefore, it doesn't work. Well, it is working. It's like the season shifting, right? You don't see the season shifting until it's happened, and you realize, well, wait a minute, when did all the trees bloom? And so that's, I think, what's occurring.
I think it's a good point. Because sometimes this work is frustrating, right? Like you can seek and you shall not find, right? You can try and try and try, and it feels like there's no progress, but probably there is a lot of progress. And I liken it to, if there was that mountain had a bunch of snow on it, and there was, a billion snowflakes on top of it, but the 1 billion and 1th snowflake that lands on it is the one that causes the avalanche,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I really like Scott Adams, who's the creator of Dilbert. I don't know if you follow him at all.
Yeah.
I really like him a lot. But one of his books, he gets into this talent stack, which is, I think, one of the best advice for young people coming up. And his talent stack thing is about, you don't need to be the best at one thing in the world, but like, if you become good at spreadsheets and math, and you're pretty good at it, and you understand accounting, and you also learn how to do public speaking, and then you learn how to make presentations, and add one or two more things, and all of a sudden those talent stacks add up, and you're a 1 percentile valuable player to the world. And it's a really, really good way to think about things. I look at that from a spiritual standpoint. Some in the spiritual community would probably disavow this thought process, because it sounds like an entrepreneur would do it. But that's why I'm saying it to you, because you'll get it. It's you create a talent stack of knowledge around these different traditions and the ways to the higher self, and you don't know which one is that snowflake that's going to create the avalanche, but you start stacking them up, and all of a sudden you're in the 1 percentile of awareness and consciousness, and it works. It absolutely works.
It does. It also, I think, it helps us hone the behavior of embracing creativity, the hunting of knowledge. I mean, so when you admit that the things you don't know, and then you go out and you look for answers, and sometimes those answers come from very non-traditional places, right? So inspiration can hit when you're listening to or you're watching a TV show about something, and you make the giant leap between whatever you're learning there and some problem that you're working on that has nothing to do with what you've been watching, right? And so those things occur all the time, but unless you're open to receiving that and being curious and learning, then you're never going to be able to see the results of that effort.
It's really dropping the judgment, right? So as we make judgments, that's what my understanding has come to. Everything that we judge, we aren't able to see what else it's trying to tell us, whether that's a person or a situation or something in nature, and you aren't open to it if you're judging. So really dropping the judgment. And you said something earlier about like waiting to talk, and I've become very conscious of, I have to be careful on these talks, because I have to keep us on a little bit of a program, but not too much. But I now listen differently than I used to. There was a time when I would be thinking of my next response, while whoever I was talking to would be selling with theirs, and then I would like, okay, now here's my point. Oh, thank you. Your point. Here's my point. and not that I didn't hear your point, but I was focused more on my point. Now what I do is, what are they really? What's the essence of what this person is actually saying to me? And it may not be the words; it may be something different. Like what is it that is being conveyed? And if I take that open stance, as you say, a lot of times the meaning will come to me, and I'll understand it differently, and then that creates a higher level of communication.
That's very well said, and it's the accruing of that knowledge in those behaviors and habits, right? So active listening, being open to learning new things. It's like your Dilbert stack. It's a talent stack. You get better at these various skills that then you can put to use when you need them, because those opportunities for improvement, they hide in plain sight. And the more you become accustomed to being open to seeing them, because they're not always obvious, then you now have a new set of tools to put them to work in ways that before you simply couldn't. And that's ultimately the essence of why we're here, is to continue to improve, elevate both in our consciousness and our understanding and compassion for helping one another, and making the helping in some small way to make the world a better place for ourselves and the other constituents that we share this environment with, whether it's animals and plants and nature, or other people that we have direct ties to or indirect ties to.
Yeah, I love that, and I love what you when one one of my questions in the pre work was, how do you reconcile spirituality and consciousness in a material physical world? And your answer was simple: gratitude. You have a stance of gratitude in everything you do, which I really appreciate, because that's how I got there too. Like gratitude got me there.
Well, look, I mean, gratitude is a practice and a journey. I mean, there are days that I can be more thoughtful in what I'm grateful for, and there are days that I'm less thoughtful. It's how deep or how broad can you go? And we're human, we're infallible, and there are days that we just screw up, right? And so it's not that we make a mistake, because we always do. The question is, how do we learn from that? How do we be introspective and say, the reality is, this is what's occurred. This is how I approached it. This is what I did wrong. These are the thought or the perspective that I had that was incorrect. Maybe I was waiting for my turn to talk. Maybe I was feeling sorry for myself, whatever. But incrementally, how do you just continue to chip away at the noise that allows you to move up those levels? Because as you get through the eye and you get to awareness, and you go higher and higher up in that graphic, that's a process and a journey, and it just doesn't happen overnight.
The gratitude is kind of the first. It's the vibration that helps you get there to start with. But we are living a human experience, so we're all human. So there's not a single human that doesn't make mistakes or hasn't made mistakes. The issue is, what do you do with those mistakes? And are you learning, like you said, and are you letting them go? And there's a letting go process where you don't beat yourself up. I mean, we're usually, the biggest critic is ourselves. Like, I remember your self-talk was, I don't belong here. I don't belong in this race. I don't belong. I can't make this. That self-talk, that's real. Your subconscious hears that, and it acts on it. And we have to learn to fix that. It's one of the things that people aren't even aware of their negative self-talk sometimes. First step is become aware of it, notice it. You don't necessarily fight it to start with, just because then you'll be mad at yourself for doing it. You'll be criticizing yourself for your negative self-talk. Instead, just once you become aware of it and you're like, oh, that's that, bring me something better. Swipe left, swipe right with your mind. Your mind will start producing what you give it energy. So if you give it energy, gratitude, you give it energy, positive things, and you don't give energy to any of the negative self-talk, it will automatically decrease.
There's a voice inside of our heads that is constantly talking, right? And so it's talking to us, right? So it's not part of our consciousness. It's part of our ego, because it's telling us, you're good at this, you're not good at this, maybe you should do that, maybe you shouldn't have done that, maybe you did. So But that voice that's in your head that is your ego, it's all it understands is gray, right? It's the spectrum of gray because it's never wrong, right? And it doesn't like to be wrong. It doesn't like to be challenged. It doesn't like to shut up. And so over time, it shouts out the heart. And the heart knows one of two things. It knows black, it knows white, it knows right, it knows wrong, right? And so when you stop listening to your heart, you make bad decisions because you're constantly readjusting, listening to that voice inside of your head that to some degree, if you actually thought about it, is crazy because it's constantly contradicting itself and it's paranoid about being wrong, right? And if we were to sit
Yeah.
next to a person that was like that, you'd be like, get me the hell away from this person, right?
Well, and what's really crazy, but I know you know this, and I know this, which is the most of those thoughts are not our own anyway. They are the thoughts of the level of your chart or Hawkins
Right,
chart of where your base ground zero is, right? So where your center of gravity is. If your center of gravity is in shame or something, one of the negative levels, those are the thoughts you're going to have. If your center of gravity is in anger, those are a lot of the thoughts you're going to have. Like you can pop out. Center of gravity is where you end up back, and you can go
right.
higher and go lower, but like you're going to end up back there. And the thoughts that you and I could sit here and make a list of here are the thoughts that you're going to have if you're at these different levels, and those are substitute the name of the culprit that caused you, that made you angry, or the situation that made you angry. So everybody's got their own little nuance to it, but it's
Right,
not that thought and that emotion are part of that field. So what we
right.
want to do in consciousness is we want to figure out ways to drop the negative things, to drop the barriers to going to these higher fields. And these higher fields come, we align ourselves, the heart and mind align themselves to where there's no gap, there's no
Right.
separation between what you were talking about with and that mind, that monkey mind that talks all the time and incessant chatter goes away. It stops. Eventually it just stops doing it, but but you don't try to stop it, because if you try to stop it, it will do more. You're energizing it, but it eventually goes away once you have alignment. But it's a process, and you have to let go of these things as you go through. And again, this is not something to seek or to find somewhere. It's innate in each of us. It's just covered up by this tar. It's covered up by the stuff. And so it's really an undoing to get to oneself that we're talking about.
Well, look, Michelangelo was once quoted in saying, and the question was, how did you create David, the masterpiece? And he said, I just chipped away what didn't belong.
Yeah,
And I think that it's the uncovering, it's the chipping away and getting rid of, all of the extraneous bullshit that doesn't belong that allows you, it's like ballast, you let it go and you rise up. And I still recall the first time when, in meditation, the chatter wasn't there. And I'm like, wait a minute, something's wrong because it was just silence. And that silence could go on forever. It was a wonderfully calming thing. So you're 100% right. There's been lots of really good nuggets in this conversation. You've laid out some really thoughtful stuff for, I think, people that are either wondering, where they are and they know that something's not right, and they're just looking for permission for ways to improve, or that they're on the journey, they've started, and they need the encouragement or they need the assistance. I think innately birds that migrate, they just innately know where to go. Nature tells them what to do. And I think for us, as we sort of balance our heart and our mind, and we get into that symbiotic state of conscious awareness, that nature to some degree takes over and allows us to point towards that true north, and we can head there. And then magically we run into people, places, resources, things that help sustain us on that journey.
absolutely. To that point, I think we did have a bunch of good topics. I think you and I could do this many more times and get into more other topics that I think would be really interesting. And I hope that you'll consider joining me again. Is there anything you're working on? I know you've got your Substack or your writing, tell people how they can get a hold of you, how they can find some of your work.
Yeah, and you can put this up on the screen, but you can find me on Substack at the Chosen Path. If you want to look at some of the work that I do, you can go to Amplify, Amplify, amplifyflow.co, amplifyflow.co. Those are two places to start. And if somebody wants to email me, it's really simple. It's my name. It's StephenToddHershberger@gmail.com. Here as a fellow traveler.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. I know there are people all over that you're affecting by your own journey. Your writings are great. The fact that you have gone through what you've gone through, and as we move up your graph on your shaman's graph, it affects everyone around us because we're all connected. No one does it for anyone else, right? It's our own journey, and we all have to figure this out. But as we do it, we help others, and frankly, the path gets easier. It's easier now to become fully enlightened than ever in history. It was much harder when the Buddha did it. And then 600 years later when Jesus did it, and it was much more difficult because the level of consciousness in all of humanity in the world was so much lower. Today, it's actually, believe it or not, you wouldn't believe it from the news, but it is much higher, and there's more, and the more people that move up, it becomes easier.
I think that we talk about the negative aspects of the internet and social media, and surely there are plenty to indict it with. But I believe that one of the positives that it has the ability to generate is that we are, in fact, 2 degrees from separation from Kevin Bacon, and through this neural connection of networks that we're all involved in, we have the ability to share this energy and these points of view as easily as we have the ability to tear others down. So it has the ability to amplify the positive just as easily as the negative, and so I think we should leverage that.
Yeah. And the higher levels of consciousness are a log 10 scale in power greater than the lower one. So someone
100%.
who's operating at a level of love or unconditional love is exponentially putting out good energy into the universe compared to someone who's operating in anger or shame or fear.
Yeah, it's like they used to say back in the day, it's the 50,000 watt radio station that, you could hear 500 miles away versus the low power station that you could only hear 2 miles away. And you're absolutely right. It is that difference. And so I think we just, we continue to amplify, and the more people are talking about this, the more people that believe in it, the more people that practice it, better off we are.
Well, Steve, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you spending time with me and with our audience, because if they made it to this part, they're on the path too.
Well, Smoke, you never have to ask me twice to hang out with you. It's all, over the course of years, it's always been interesting. It's always been enlightening, and it's always been a joy. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to another one.
All right. Well, maybe we'll do it on a hike in Sedona. We'll do it live.
Sounds good, man.
All
Cheers.
right. Cheers.